Hi everyone, this is Dan, and this is the Amazing Spider-Man Epic Collection. This is Great Power by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. These are some of the trade paperback collections of essentially classic Marvel comics, basically the original runs, such as, example, the original Fantastic Four. That's typically what the Epic collections are. I forget when this was done. I'm not sure if this was a C.V. Cebulski idea or an Axel Alonso. But I will say this, Marvel does a very good job of the quality of their trade paperbacks when they decide to actually do them, and when they do their extremely limited and frustrating limited print runs of their classic comics. I'm not sure why both Marvel and DC do this, but they make it excruciatingly difficult to collect their comics in a logical format. Even this doesn't make a lot of sense because there's no, as you can see, it just says Great Power, Amazing Spider-Man, and you wouldn't know that this is the first one that you need to get, and that this one, Great Responsibility, is the second one that you need to get, because again, there's no one or two. For every one good thing that these companies do, they do like a bunch of other really stupid things. That being said, this particular collection, trade paperback, includes Amazing Fantasy number 15, The Amazing Spider-Man 1 through 17, and Annual number 1. So essentially, you even have the Epic right here, classic original Epic. So essentially, the very beginning of Spider-Man, right? So today I'm going to be going over Amazing Fantasy number 15. By the way, if you actually own the original comic book, you are extremely wealthy or extremely lucky, is what I will say. So this is the first appearance of Spider-Man, period, and it is the origin story of Spider-Man, and it is fantastic. I'm not going to try to go over all the details and nuances. I think you should ultimately read this story because it is an absolute classic, and so many videos have gone over this because this is the origin of Spider-Man, and so many, I guess, media and literature have gone over this. But essentially, this is the introduction of Peter Parker, who is not a very popular kid. You get a little foreshadowing here, visual foreshadowing by Steve Ditko here. So Steve Ditko's art, throughout his career, I should say, has always been, it's definitely energetic, I would say, in a different way than Kirby. Kirby definitely had his own style, and I'm not sure if it's necessarily the inker, Art Simek, or I forget the other inker that Marvel had at the time. This is classic Marvel. But there was always more of a thinness to the lines and the rendering in Steve Ditko's art compared to Kirby. Kirby had a heaviness to his art. I don't know if that's maybe just my own feeling. Again, I'm not going to claim I'm some hardcore Ditko or Kirby aficionado. I'm actually not. Again, for those of you who have been following the channel, I'm relatively new to American comics, mainly because I technically grew up with Archie comics and manga. So a lot of this is me kind of discovering it with all of you who are far more experienced, or maybe not as experienced as me. But anyway, let's get into this. This is the origin of Spider-Man. So we get, again, Stan Lee basically spinning a great yarn right here, showing his background, his Uncle Ben, Aunt May, and Peter Parker's rather poor luck with the kids, with the ladies, and also kind of being a nerd. I like the visual right here. You see how technically the hand here is all jacked up per anatomy, but it doesn't matter because ultimately what you see is, this guy brushing off Peter Parker and taking his girl, right? So kind of shows you right here, back in these days, right, it wasn't necessarily about the technical correctness of the art rather than, does it tell a story? Because here you have obviously something that doesn't look that great, but ultimately this is a classic comic book, so it doesn't matter. And functionally, it tells the story, right? So we go through, there's Peter Parker going to this science exhibit, radioactive spider gets bit, and finds out that he has obtained powers. Notice how we've kind of jumped here and sufficiently explained Peter Parker, his situation, and how he even ends up in a position to run into a radioactive spider, and him discovering his powers in literally 3 pages. So like this right here is what American comics were all about. That brevity of storytelling, right? The ability to tell a story in very few pages through the magic of the visual medium, right? So here you see him jumping around, him game planning, him getting into some rowdy fights and finding out, he could probably monetize this talent of his, and him coming up with his costume and even his web shooters. As has been explained previously, Peter Parker's kind of a science nerd, so kind of makes sense for him to come up with his own thing. And here we go, original classic Spider-Man. I like how thin he is compared to, like, this is kind of like almost a little flabby in a way, right? Like, it seems like anti-heroic, but in a way I think, it kind of helps show that Peter Parker is not some, like, uber macho man, right? He's, initially just, a teenage boy, right? So you go and here is Peter Parker monetizing his talents and having monetized his talents and become a successful YouTuber. I mean, a successful attraction. He's suddenly too big for anyone else to deal with him anymore. And he lets this villainous guy go without even helping the cops. You even get this great one right here where just like, he mentions to himself that, he's going to make sure that Aunt May and Uncle Ben are well taken care of with his newfound talents, but the rest of the world can, bite me. It's kind of his attitude right here. The structure of the writing that Stan Lee uses in this really short story is so effective and succinct. It's really, like, I cannot enjoy it enough, I guess I should say, right? There's a lot of people that are very critical of Stan Lee's writing style, right? And the writing style of the classic American comic book writers of the day. And, I kind of understand where they're coming from, especially if you compare them to the much more technically savvy and more, I would say, just artistic sort of writing that later came from a lot of the British writers that later dominated the field, in the late 80s going into the 90s. Like Stan Lee, the way he writes, it's not comparable, to Alan Moore, Neil Gaiman, and, even, what I'm going to go over later, Grant Morrison, right? But honestly, there's something about it that I like it more. And I'm not sure the right way to say it. I think it's the clarity of his storytelling, right? Yeah, he has like little phrases that he kind of repeats or little kind of mannerisms or writing habits that he always has. But there's something about the way Stan Lee and a lot of the older American writers told stories in these old books that I just feel is like, it's really timeless. And I feel it's kind of sad that nobody really wants to, adopt this style anymore. It's considered archaic, which is unfortunate because this is an extremely entertaining story for how short it is. So, yeah, so Spider-Man goes out, and here we get like a great time lapse right here. Look at that. They were doing these kind of time lapse panels back in the 60s of Spider-Man's fame growing, and then he goes back home, finds a police car there. Uncle Ben's been shot and murdered, and here I love the facial expressions by Steve Ditko. This was back in the 60s when there weren't I guess enormous strides in terms of facial expressions on characters. Some of you guys may have seen like my Discovering Green Lantern series, where I go over a lot of the really old Green Lantern, like original Hal Jordan, and some of the facial expressions are just sort of like from Gil Kane are kind of dead faced. They're not really, emoting well. You can see here, like, Steve Ditko, like, really showing, how crushed and frustrated and angry Peter Parker is, And then Stan Lee, upping it with these great dialogue, I know the old Acme warehouse. It's been deserted for years. A killer could hold off an army in that gloomy old place, but he won't hold off Spider-Man. So in comes Spider-Man to whip the shit out of this guy. And, once he defeats the bad guy with a well-placed punch, finds out it's the guy that he let go. And, he he ends up webbing up the guy in the classic Spider-Man fashion, just hanging him there. You know, this gets repeated so many times because this is essentially Spider-Man's trademark from Amazing Fantasy number 15. And you can see the crushed look on Peter Parker, and really what amounts to not only an origin story, but essentially, you know, something akin to like an Aesop's fable, right? There's a lesson to this comic book, you know, something deeper into it. And this was kind of the case for a lot of the old comic books. There was something that they were trying to, there was a moral or a theme, you know, something that they were trying to emote to the readers. A lot of them back in these days being young readers, right? So, you know, trying to keep young readers on the straight and narrow here. So, and the most, you know, classic line of all, you know, with great power there must also come great responsibility. You know, the you know, the great theme of Spider-Man, in addition to the many other themes that this goes for, and that is Amazing Spider-Man. You get a little nice note from the editor, and then Spider-Man gets involved in like space stuff in the Fantastic Four in the next issue. And they really knew how to kick it up back in these days. They were going like all balls to the walls back in the 60s. They were like, we're doing everything to take on DC. Let's do this. But yeah, no, Amazing Fantasy number 15. You know, it is a, you know, again, look at this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10. No, it's actually 11 pages. It's actually 11 pages. In 11 pages, Stan Lee and Steve Ditko sufficiently, you know, created an origin story, a conflict, you know, a resolution, and you know, also taught us a very important lesson, us the reader, an important lesson, all in 11 pages. You know, the power of, you know, writing and sequential art working together to tell a story, right? You know, by the master himself, Stan Lee, and masters, I should say, Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, right? Anyhow, I've kind of emoted enough about this, but there you go. Compressed storytelling at its finest. All right, let's get to the art. So, I'm going to call this the warm-up session because you guys know I've been gone for a couple weeks. So, this isn't good. You know, it's okay. I did this with 0.5 and 0.7 kind of combos. I kind of ran the body with 0.7. So the obvious thing is this kind of feels a little awkward with the foreshortening, and I think in hindsight I should have made his torso much longer. You know, he kind of has more like these really long arms and long legs, but like a really teeny torso. So could have done better there. But anyway, let's see what I can do in the inks. 3, 2, 1. Okay, spoiler alert, still sucks, but looks a little cleaner, I guess. You know, it's kind of the nature of going from pencils to inks, right? Can't really change bad anatomy, so you kind of have to just roll with it and go, right? Anyhow, let me see what I can do in colors. 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's just chalk this one up to warming up after a long vacation. And we'll try and do better next time. It's actually okay. Mainly was rendering with these guys. So I was using a lot of cool and warm grays to kind of offset the blue and the red as much as I could. Again, Spider-Man's actually a really straightforward design other than the stupid little pinstripe webbing that he has going on here. But you kind of have to really accentuate sort of his lean ness in all of this, right? Like example, like if you take a look at this one right here, look at kind of how he's like stretching across the entire thing and really kind of do that. Like this right here is just a little too stiff, and obviously the anatomy is wrong. But with regards to the color, you know, I think this would look a lot better if the actual pencils underneath were done better. Anyhow, that's the video, guys. Let me know what you think. If you like this video, please hit the thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Hit the bell for notifications. You got any comments about the Amazing Fantasy number 15, the origin of Spider-Man? Leave it down below, and I will see you next time.